Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with understanding what the end client is ultimately anticipating being able to do. It may be a crawl, walk, run approach. It may be a self-managed approach in which they anticipate being able to do everything from a content production and deployment perspective in-house. Oftentimes we start with customers that have that goal, and then as they seek to unlock more value out of their investment, drive more complexity in their content deployments, or cycle through resources and lose some of the expertise that they initially had when they stood up the network, they look to us or other third parties to do that content production and programming and deployment work for them. So I think a lot of it is about, really understanding what the end client's able to do themselves or what they anticipate wanting to be able to do themselves, and helping them to understand potentially what the value is in having someone like ourselves or others that are really well versed in managing the complexity of these systems, and what that value would be. In our case, oftentimes we have customers that find pushing content to us approved through their agencies, or developed by their agencies, approved through them, and then allowing us to deploy it is much less painful, and also provides a degree of insulation between the parties that are ultimately responsible for ensuring that this content is in the right place at the right time, especially when it's monetized, on an ad network or a co-op network, and there's a lot of skin in the game. In a mission-critical environment for informational execution, specifically, where menu boards are, paramount to the operation of a QSR environment, for example, ensuring that there's failover and redundancy in the overall systems design, and also a degree of service level that is often much, much higher than, by comparison, a digital sign that is placed in the back of a department store, where it may be a component of the overall customer experience, but not necessarily critical to doing business. Those drive different service level agreement considerations, and typically there's a monetary differentiation as well in terms of how those are supported.
I would just add a couple of things to that, which one of them would be, in terms of developing a content strategy, you really want to have a good feel for who your viewers are ultimately, and what they're expecting, or how you're hoping to enhance their journey, whether it's path to purchase, or path to work, or path to an airplane. Typically digital signage is a waypoint along the way from point A to point B, and represents either a call to action or some kind of information. So understanding who those viewers might be, what their dwell time is, will have a good deal of impact on the length of your typical piece of content, how often it shows up on the screen, etc. And as Jay said, it could come from within. It could come from an agency, especially if it's ad-related or brand-related. That's typically coming out of a large agency, and sometimes the agencies are managing the network. Or it could be in-house, using tools that may or may not come from your software providers, etc. And then as it relates to digital menu boards, which Jay mentioned, there's the big thing about large-scale QSR or digital menu board types of rollouts is that it's very rare for two stores of the same chain to offer the same thing on the same day at the same time. There are standard items that are in every store, but regional deals, specials of the day, etc., optional things that franchisees can opt in or opt out on, etc. So there's really two pieces of it. One piece is making the content available, and the other piece is allowing the localized changes to be made. And that's typically best done through software and through and by the end user, the manager or regional manager type levels at those chains, because they want to make the change and they want to see it on the board, because, as I said, it's mission critical. If you say you have coffee and you don't, that's a problem. So there's a lot of stuff to consider, and it gets back into process, and it gets back into objectives again. So as Rich said, it's not as simple as hanging a screen on the wall and pushing content around. If it was, anybody could do it. So.
Sure, Rich. From your perspective, does NEC or do manufacturers get involved in the content creation piece, or do they kind of leave that to an integrator or a content creation team to get to take care of on their own?
So what we try to do is we help, right? And so what we'll do is we build out a really strong list of who are the really good content creation firms that are out there. And it's amazing. There's so many really good content creation companies out there who focus on everything from the video game industry to web design to photography. You go down the list of it, right? And so if you look at our booths, and I mean, you look at Ken's booth, you look at my booth, you look at pretty much all the major manufacturers' booths at DSC, our content is amazing. And it's because of those relationships we have. And I mean, we deal with some of the largest content creation houses in the industry, and we deal with some of the smallest ones. It doesn't really matter how big or small you are. It matters about the talent. And so what we generally try to do is when we sit down and we talk to a customer and we talk about their strategies, and we say, okay, what are you planning to show on content? What do you guys want to do? What do you have capabilities of doing in-house? Because a lot of people they'll have people who can do some content in-house. But then they go, but I want to do, say they want to do this amazing mural on the wall, they're going to probably need some help. And so what we generally do is we'll connect them to different content people that we feel are the right ones. The biggest thing you always run into is what's their backlog, do you have a budget set aside for the content work that needs to be done, and make sure you prep accordingly. But we really help make those recommendations, connect the dots. We don't do content. We don't create content ourselves. I mean, we do it for our own internal use, but we utilize these companies as well. And there are some absolutely amazing content houses out there.
Okay. Jay or Ken or Rich, do you guys have, kind of a preference in terms of whether it's better to have a content team in-house or sub it out? And I imagine there are concerns, on either side, whether it's price or, kind of leaving it to somebody else or whatever the case may be. Ken, maybe you want to start on that one.
Yeah, sure. I was just typing some notes on that. It's really a matter of cost effectiveness in the end. You're certainly going to have a budget for getting that done, and you may or may not have some folks identified in-house who have the skills to do it, at least at the outset. And you really have to evaluate those skills and their availability and internal cost versus those you may be able to access in terms of outside resources. And there's no single answer. I notice in the question the person asks, if you sub it out and that company is backed up, you may have trouble meeting your deadlines and satisfying your clients. And I think you resolve that through service level agreements with any vendor, whether it's someone providing software or someone providing services. They're going to tell you, here's the lead time for video production, here's the lead time for graphics, here's the lead time for images, et cetera, and that's a commitment. If you give me the order on day 0, I must deliver it by day 3 or 5 or whatever it may be, and there are consequences if they don't. So the onus is on you to plan. Call on Friday and say I need it Saturday, and the onus is on them to have the resources available that says, if I get an order on Monday, I'm committed to deliver it by Friday or whatever it might be, or there are financial consequences. So I wouldn't worry about not getting delivery, because you don't get 3 strikes on that as a vendor. You generally get 1, so people should be on the ball.
Okay, Jay, anything to add on that?
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, has to do with your own internal bandwidth. It looks like this question is coming from a group that is got some capability internally and is, fearful potentially of relinquishing some of the control or potential cost efficiency of doing this in-house and in exchange for being able to take on more volume. Our approach tends to be that, we want to have a stable of partners that are trusted, and, we give them opportunities to prove themselves on projects that, aren't for our biggest clients, so that when we have those opportunities for our biggest clients, we can confidently rely on those resources and, understand that their resource availability is a bit elastic depending on what's happening elsewhere in their own projects. So I think, a subcontracted approach certainly can work, and to both Rich and Ken's point, that there's so many different content houses out there in the market right now that oftentimes being able to have kind of some qualified solution providers that check specific boxes or can work with a given aesthetic, or are really good in custom HTML programming work versus 2D graphic animation, for example. All of those skill sets tend to be better and individualized on a per solution provider basis. So we try to matrix and map those out and really have a good feel for who's best to plug into a given project, if in the event that we can't do that with our own internal resources.
Rich, do you,
Yeah, and I think, the thing, Craig.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the one thing I just add to that is one of the biggest problems everyone has when they do a digital signage project, they try to boil the ocean. They try to do everything themselves. And what ends up happening is by doing that, they actually delay the project. They paralyze themselves. And while you might have a great marketing department who can do a lot of really good content and probably can create a lot of really good advertising for you, don't be afraid to work with other companies. You're working with people, that's what they do for a living all day long. They know whether or not the font is going to be too small for a display if you're putting it on a 4K screen. They know if the colors are not going to look right, or you're going to have way too much motion. I always laugh. You get some organizations, they put so much motion on their screen, it distracts from everything you're doing. Menu boards are a really easy example. When we first started looking at digital menu boards, and we were first doing those 7-8 years ago, you'd see Coca-Cola bottles with sweat going down the side of the bottle, and you'd see steam coming off of food, and you saw motion going across the screen. That was distracting from what you were trying to convey. The marketing team thought it was really cool to see all that stuff, but it didn't support the goals and the objectives and everything like that. They changed it when they started talking to content creation companies, and they said, well, if you do this, this is what your drawback's going to be. So those people, that's what they do day in and day out. So don't be afraid to work with them and learn from them.
Yeah, and I would just point out that what they probably realize that the original objective of the digital menu board is to help people make their decisions faster so that they can move people faster and satisfy them, not tantalize them with fireworks. Certainly try to change their decision, but do it in a timely fashion.